comes in and basically starts the dumbest trade war in the history of this country. This is going to be about potentially millions of people losing their jobs. It's going to be about millions of people losing their savings, many of people losing their retirement security, and at the same time taking on even higher costs for everything they buy.
Many months later.
So the tariffs, Grant, are not causing inflation as the angle predicted. There wouldn't be inflation.
That's
Money
right.
is pouring into the country. So what is Powell doing here exactly?
Well, he's either stupid, which I don't think is the case, or he's just unpatriotic and he's actually wanting to damage, as he promised a year ago, Laura. He was willing to even damage the middle class if it controlled inflation. But in truth, the American people need to know that Jerome Powell nor any Fed has ever controlled inflation.
So today is just yet another one of those days where we're seeing a flurry of economic wins by the Trump administration in total defiance of Jerome Powell and the so-called expert class, who have been telling us by now that we should be in a total period of stagflation, prices should be up 1,000%, we should already basically be in a recession by now, and none of those things continue to be happening. As a matter of fact, in today's video, we're going to cover for you how inflation continues to drop. Now, keep in mind, this is despite the fact that by now, right, first when April took place and Liberation Day happened, we didn't really see any real inflation, but they told us, okay, just wait until May. Then when May came and we did not see a significant hike or anything there in inflation, they said, okay, but wait till the summer. That's when the supply chains are going to feel it. That's when you're really going to see the tariff inflation. And yet still, guys, it is now almost the middle of July. We are still not seeing the so-called tariff inflation, and yet despite all of it, Jerome Powell continues to refuse to cut interest rates, which is an ultimately destructive decision that at this point I think can frankly be blamed for a lot of the stagnation, if there is to be any. Not seeing the signs necessarily, but if you're going to say that in the economy, because it is just baffling, it defies all logic, it defies what many other nations are doing. There's an undeniable fact at this point. You have a Democrat who is intentionally trying to sabotage the Trump administration. Let's not forget, by the way, he massively cut rates before the 2024 election to try to save Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But yet now, despite the fact he said he was not going to lower the rates because of tariff inflation, you have no tariff inflation, but he's still saying, wait for it, wait for the tariff inflation. You know, this guy's no different than the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist who thinks like the aliens are going to come tomorrow or something. It's like the rates are going to go, the inflation's going to go up, watch and watch. But anyways, we've got that to talk about, as well as some progress here on the trade front, because apparently Donald Trump, after many years of hammering the EU, specifically the nation of Germany, for buying Russian natural gas, despite claiming to be against Russia, you know, there's a little bit of a contradiction there. These people screamed at us for months saying we did not support Ukraine enough, even though they barely give anything to Ukraine. And then now on top of it, the sheer and utter hypocrisy of saying, okay, we're going to be anti-Russia as a nation and as a federation here, but we're also going to continue to buy Russian gas. And then when our economy is totally destroyed because of our own sanctions on Russia, because guess what? We were reliant on their energy. They're not apparently giving Trump any credit for warning them about that long before this war happened. Well, apparently, finally here today, Germany is agreeing to buy natural gas from the United States of America like Trump has wanted them to do since the first term. So big economic victory domestically here at home, big inflation victory, but also a win here on trade that is very significant and really sort of a vindication, frankly, of the things that Trump has been saying and warning about for years. So you can mark that up as another Trump was right moment. And then on top of that, guys, we have to talk about what is arguably the most important statistic of it all, which is the way in which the Trump economic policies, but also combined here with the very real issue of deportations, because there's a connection there, despite all of this talk about how the economy needs illegal immigration. Actually, as a matter of fact, more prosperity now because of these policies is being felt by, guess what? Native-born workers, American citizens. Very important. So we'll tell you all about today's economic developments in today's video. First, though, folks, as usual, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe if you are new. Subscribing to the channel is the best way to support these videos, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, so let's, of course, start with the current Truflation Index, because It's kind of been a recurring trend you keep on seeing, through February, March. It's been going down and down, right? Inflation has been slowing. Of course, now, ladies and gentlemen, the US inflation index has dropped to 1.66%. Extremely low, especially for a summer period where supposedly, right, the tariffs should have this way up in the sky. That is, of course, not happening, which further vindicates again here the idea that Jerome Powell is fundamentally wrong about the so-called tariff inflation. Nobody is seeing it. Nobody's really feeling it. And that, again, is a vindication to cut the interest rates. Of course, in news today, Bitcoin also reached its all-time high of $112,000 per Bitcoin. So pretty cool for those of you who are crypto traders or whatever. But furthermore, we have the statement here from Donald Trump in response to what you're seeing today. He just put out on Truth Social, once again pressuring too late Jerome Powell to freaking resign because he has no idea what he's doing here, saying, quote, a new study by the Council of Economic Advisors, led by the highly respected chair, Dr. Stephen Morand, has found that tariffs have had zero impact on inflation. And in fact, the study shows that import prices, very shockingly, how does this happen, right? Import prices are actually dropping, just like I said they always would. The fake news and the so-called experts were wrong again, which, by the way, I think is a recurring trend you're seeing in the economy and many other facets of Trump's presidency right now. The conventional economic thinking of like economic professors for many decades here about how total free trade and total open borders must mean economic growth because, hey, look at the prices, look at the GDP, worker productivity, all that stuff is just a wrong way of viewing things. It does not accurately measure prosperity, or even in this sense, perhaps even the economy itself, and hence why, by the way, Trump was elected as the populist candidate over the, mainstream establishment candidates years ago. It's precisely because of this, because the American people are not feeling the so-called prosperity that we were told we're supposed to be doing as a result of like neoliberal economic policies and the conventional view of free trade. But whatever, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Here's what Trump further goes on to say, quote, tariffs are making our country boom. Many new factories, jobs, and trillions of dollars in investments are pouring into the USA. Someone should show this new study to too late Jerome Powell, who has been whining like a baby nonstop about non-existent inflation for months and is refusing to do the right thing. Cut the interest rates, Jerome. Now is the time. Of course, we're further here going to point out, as Bernie Moreno actually recently went out and noted here, one man, Jerome Powell, is currently, by the way, not just slowing the U.S. economy, because it's a problem, right? You have basically a housing market right now where people are selling at still high prices, but nobody's buying, because guess why? Everyone is just standing around waiting for the interest rates to come down. And as a result of it, Jerome is sort of like screwing, and people are saying, signs of recession, consumption is down. You know why consumption is down? You know why investment is down? Because people are waiting for you to make a move. And Jerome Powell is just standing here like, but anyways, nonetheless, as he further here notes, by the way, in response to the current demands over fiscal conservatism, that he's currently costing this country $400 billion a year between homeowners, yes, businesses, credit card holders are suffering here, but on top of that, even the interest payments being made on the national debt, all of these things are important, and that is precisely why Jerome Powell is a saboteur. He's a sabotage agent, frankly, at this point, against the United States.
I want to move on to something that I noticed yesterday on the Hill, where we saw a verbal takedown that you did of the Fed Chair Jerome Powell. Of course, huge contention about his refusal to lower interest rates in the United States despite no signs of inflation. Here's a snippet for our viewers.
It says the Federal Reserve plays no role in commenting on trade policy. So you don't comment on supply shocks. You don't comment on tax policy, which clearly affects inflation. You comment on tariffs. So I'm going to just show you.
I don't comment on tariffs at all, actually. I comment on inflation.
Only commented on tariffs. You've only
commenting on the wisdom of tariffs.
You are costing this government $400 billion a year by refusing to lower interest rates. I just think that you should consider whether you're really looking at this from a fiscal lens or a political lens, because you just don't like tariffs.
Powell is infuriated that Trump's tariffs have not caused a recession or inflation. Should he be removed given the damage he's causing this country? One man?
Absolutely, Laura. He cost this country
over $400 billion a year. Plus, this is just the federal government, our cost of borrowing, plus homeowners, people who take out car loans, people who have credit card debt, businesses that are trying to get loans. One man should not be able to cost this economy, this country that much because he has a personal beef with the President of the United States. This guy's term is up next May. I've advocated that he should be immediately removed. We can put somebody in there. If we just lowered our rates to where Japan is, who has higher inflation, Japan has higher inflation than we do, we would save hundreds of billions of dollars. We're in the middle of a tough reconciliation bill where we have to make compromises on what we're going to cut. We wouldn't have to do any of that if we had a person that was willing to just do it with the rational thing and cut interest rates, which is the common sense thing to do. This guy needs to go. He's a partisan.
And by the way, I think, frankly, two things are going on here. First of all is obviously Trump derangement syndrome. He just wants to sabotage the sort of outsider president to prove, hey, like our establishment kind of rule, our policies work, etc. But on top of that, I also think there's just pure cognitive dissonance here. Jerome Powell obviously subscribes to the traditional, failed by the way, but traditional economic philosophy that basically states that, yes, unfettered free trade is good. Everything should be about like goods and services moving back and forth, the GDP, and therefore tariffs will raise prices because they're a tax on the consumer and all of this. And of course, when now you're kind of seeing in practice outside of your little economic books, in reality, that's not really happening. The issues are more complicated than that. And frankly, they're just wrong. Like they just don't understand economics here. He just doesn't want to accept it, right? So he's basically now becoming this like paranoid conspiracy theorist. The inflation is coming, you know, kind of hiding in the corner of his room there. And it's not the reality, frankly. And it's insane. You know, obviously he ought to be resigning right now. And that is what Trump today yesterday in the cabinet meeting noted here, saying that Jerome Powell should resign in disgrace immediately, and saying here further that Congress should investigate his corruption. This is, of course, regarding to the fact that he is spending a ludicrous amount of money on basically renovating the Federal Reserve building. And when testifying in front of Congress, being asked about it, the argument is being made that he outright lied to Congress. But anyways, take a listen.
He's facing accusations of lying to Congress, which is a potential crime about the opulence.
He should resign immediately. That's going to lower interest rates.
Do you want congressional
Why don't you go for his resignation?
Do you want congressional Republicans to investigate and pursue?
It's okay with me. I think he's terrible. I think, look, we're paying, I call him too late. T-O-O, too late. Like Too Tall Jones for the Dallas Cowboys, right? Too late. He's always late. But he wasn't late with Biden before the election. He was cutting him like crazy. It didn't help too much, did it? But he was cutting him like crazy before the election with Kamala and Biden. He was trying to get them in, I guess. I don't know. He was recommended by somebody that worked for me. I like you better.
If I could ask the Attorney General.
And by the way, it's worth noting here that the Trump administration is quite purposely, and rightfully, by the way, because he seemingly here did actually do some nefarious things here, but ensuring that this little scandal with him allegedly lying to Congress over this very corrupt and wasteful, frankly, $2.5 billion renovation of the Federal Reserve's building is making sure it doesn't go away, precisely because he wants to put as much pressure as possible for Jerome Powell to essentially be resigning here. And I mean, yeah, sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. As you can see, President Trump ramped up his war of words with Fed Chair Jerome Powell on Tuesday by backing calls for a probe into whether he lied to Congress about a $2.5 billion upgrade to the central bank's headquarters. It's okay with me. I think he's terrible, Trump told reporters during the cabinet meeting. I call him too late, etc. Trump, who has repeatedly slammed Powell over his unwillingness to slash interest rates, added that his nemesis should, quote, resign immediately if this current investigation proves that he misled Congress. This, of course, comes after the Federal Housing Finance Agency Director William Pute demanded a full inquiry following Powell's testimony into the Senate Banking Committee last month, the Post reported, saying here, quote, it's going to get worse for Jerome Powell. who is also the chair of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, I believe Powell not only lied to Congress, but is also covering up for improper payments related to the $2.5 billion renovation of the Fed building. This, of course, has already ballooned by 30% from its original estimate of $1.9 billion. So a lot of shady stuff, a lot of corruption there obviously going on. And yes, the Trump administration is right and smart to, hey, given that it's happening under Powell's leadership, point that out, because honestly, a lot of questions have to be asked about this guy, his motives, you know, the whole deal here. But anyways, there you have the story out of inflation and interest rates. Want to shift gears here to yet another economic victory won by the Trump administration today, where apparently, as I told you in the beginning, Germany, after years of refusing to do this, after years of, again, as I said, relying on Russian energy, while also screaming at the United States for not fighting hard against Russia enough, the hypocrisy, the paradox there, right? It's like these European nations always want America to basically come and do everything for them. But you know how that goes. I mean, we've been talking about that NATO and stuff for some time, but they're agreeing to import more liquefied gas from the Gulf of America. And the United States is now officially the largest supplier for Germany in terms of liquefied natural gas after President Trump told them to buy more. And hence here, after years of him pushing this issue, they're finally buying more. Big victory, very important.
There is some non-OPEC related energy news today. Venture Global, publicly traded VG, making a deal with Germany. They will now be the largest exporter. The U.S. will be the largest exporter of liquefied natural gas to Germany on the back of that deal.
So there you have it. One of our biggest partners in NATO finally showing a, first of all, degree of gratitude, but also a degree of unity, like strategic unity. Because if you're going to scream at the other members of this alliance to say, stand up to Russia, we need to sanction Russia, yet you're crashing your own economy and then complaining about the fact that you crashed your own economy because you sanctioned Russia, who's your top supplier of liquefied natural gas, but you refuse to buy it from the United States for years. That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but still, I would like to compare it to this video from Trump's first administration back here to, I believe it was 2019, and you can see here, guys, the big difference that the span of 4 to 5 years is making in the way in which the second term is fundamentally different. Continuity in some ways because he's pushing the same issues, but fundamentally people are listening to him differently now that he is the president once again, and it's a good thing to see.
I think it's very sad when Germany makes a massive oil and gas deal with Russia where you're supposed to be guarding against Russia, and Germany goes out and pays billions and billions of dollars a year to Russia. So we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting all of these countries. And then numerous of the countries go out and make a pipeline deal with Russia where they're paying billions of dollars into the coffers of Russia. So we're supposed to protect you against Russia, but they're paying billions of dollars to Russia, and I think that's very inappropriate. And the former chancellor of Germany is the head of the pipeline company that's supplying the gas. Ultimately, Germany will have almost 70% of their country controlled by Russia with natural gas. So you tell me, is that appropriate? I mean, I've been complaining about this from the time I got in. It should have never been allowed to have happened. But Germany is totally controlled by Russia because they were getting from 60 to 70% of their energy from Russia and a new pipeline. And you tell me if that's appropriate, because I think it's not. And I think it's a very bad thing for NATO, and I don't think it should have happened. And I think we have to talk to Germany about it. On top of that, Germany is just paying a little bit over 1%, whereas the United States, in actual numbers, is paying 4.2% of a much larger GDP. So I think that's inappropriate also. You know, we're protecting Germany, we're protecting France, we're protecting everybody, and yet we're paying a lot of money to protect. Now, this has been going on for decades. This has been brought up by other presidents, but other presidents never did anything about it, because I don't think they understood it or they just didn't want to get involved. But I have to bring it up because I think it's very unfair to our country. It's very unfair to our taxpayer. And I think that these countries have to step it up, not over a 10-year period. They have to step it up immediately. Germany is a rich country. They talk about they're going to increase it a tiny bit by 2030. Well, they could increase it immediately tomorrow and have no problem. I don't think it's fair to the United States. So we're going to have to do something because we're not going to put up with it. We can't put up with it. And
they're not just a rich country, they're a rich country with significantly higher taxes than ours. But of course, let's stand around, let's pretend like we're going to do something, but let's not really do anything there. And finally, years later, after ironically screaming at us saying, oh, you know, you guys are America's abandoning Ukraine. They're abandoning NATO. They're, sitting down in front of Russia. Who's doing that? Who's the one doing that, right? Who's the one opening up? By the way, a big argument as to why maybe Putin found it strategic to go into Ukraine to begin with, is because, as Trump points out here, there was a huge strategic flaw in the kind of energy security of Europe that Trump kept telling you year after year, way before this war started. You need to do something about this. It's a problem. It's not good. It's not secure. It's also not fair, obviously, to NATO and the United States. And then, of course, you may remember back to like 2019, where the German delegation at the UN was just sitting there laughing at him. Well, who's right? Who's laughing now, right? But anyways, big victory there. Might be small in the grand scheme of things, but I think in the way it demonstrates how Trump is just always vindicated on these geopolitical issues, definitely a good sign there to see. And of course, perhaps here, guys, in the economic news, the single most important statistic that we also got today, a lot of news today, is that the new jobs report here is revealing that American-born workers have gained 2 million jobs since January, while foreign-born workers lost 543,000. And as I said, I think this is the most important statistic of them all.
President Trump's crackdown on illegal immigration seems to be showing up in the jobs data. It's a point that the White House is making. Here's what they said about the latest jobs report. It shows that American-born workers have accounted for all of the job gains since President Trump took office, and wages continue to rise. So here are the numbers that they're talking about. Foreign-born employment has fallen by 543,000 since January, when President Trump took office. Native-born or U.S.-born jobs have increased by more than 2 million since the month Trump started his second term.
That's so important. And that, by the way, is the reason why, despite all the fear-mongering you hear, the kind of guilt-tripping about deportations, about the immigration issue, no, this is precisely the exact reason why it's so important, is because there is actually a direct correlation between these deportations. And by the way, you look at many of our major cities, what has fundamentally become, especially in the past 4 years, a super overcrowded country, whether that's traffic, real estate, many other things there, right? Job market as well, by the way, people just surging, looking for things. This fundamentally is helping, as you can see indisputably, it's undeniable there, further the prosperity of American citizens, specifically here, even native-born American citizens, which I would argue there's an important aspect there, simply because when you look at any immigration system, I think it's an undeniable fact, you ought to craft an immigration system that most benefits the people already living in a country, okay? All these people say, oh, these people are coming to America, they want a better life, they're coming from poor places, all this stuff. Okay, that's fine. But the job of the American government ought to be not to give charity to the rest of the world, but ask, is our immigration policy fundamentally a good thing or a bad thing for the people already living here? This is our community. We ought to have a way to decide who comes into this community, right? But anyways, nonetheless here, this is a big contrast to what you saw under Biden, where these numbers were essentially reversed. I believe the number, according to some estimates, is as high as 90%. 90% of all new jobs created under Biden went primarily to non-Americans and non-native-born population there. Not just talking, by the way, about illegal immigrants. We're also talking about, people on work visas, stuff like that. But that, of course, is a significant trend to discuss, because when we hear all this talk, I think this is so important for people to remember about the supposed economic prosperity under Joe Biden. Remember all this stuff? People said, oh, the jobs market is good, wages, this and that, GDP, look at the GDP. And most average Americans were looking around and saying, where is the supposedly good Joe Biden economy? I don't feel anything good. Everything in my life got ostensibly worse in the past 4 years. That is precisely because of this fact, right? Economic growth does not just mean anything in itself. If the gains felt by an economic growth or policy is not felt by the core population, and specifically the American citizens, the native-born population there, then the economic prosperity, frankly, is useless. Again, policies ought to benefit the people who were born in a nation. And if you're going to have immigration, it ought to come to a benefit, not a detriment to the people who are already living there. And this is precisely why I see it as like a major vindication, a major promise fulfilled of the Trump mandate. There's still work to do, frankly, because I'll tell you this, as a Gen Zer, I'm 22 years old. I just graduated college. Basically, nobody I know, besides a few rare exceptions, and even including people going into like trades after getting a college education, can really find a market. Okay, the job market is not good for Gen Z. I'm not just talking about people who majored in gender studies or something, talking about computer science, engineering. And a big problem for this is not just AI and many other economic factors, but also the fact that a lot of these jobs, you look at H-1B programs like that, are being given to non-Americans, you know, not in higher skill labor, not necessarily illegal aliens, but mass migration, basically, right? These foreign guest workers who come over, work for cheaper, and it's a major problem, right? And again, you can look at that on paper and say, oh, look, well, I mean, the economy is growing because all the Fortune 500 companies are, you know, making more money and stuff. But again, if the younger people in our country cannot graduate college or turn 18 or turn 22 and go into the jobs market and have a reasonable chance to compete, that is grounds for political revolution. That is not, you know, a good state of an economy. And so I know I'm kind of going on here, but that is precisely why I think of all the stuff we talked about, this is the most important number of them all, because the current prosperity, the gains are being felt by the actual Americans who live here. And that is the biggest contrast between the Trump economy and the Biden economy. The Biden economy was supposedly good on paper. They told you that a million times, but this is the core difference, of course. Also relates to a story I've recently also covered, even on the front of sort of so-called lower, education, I guess you could say, jobs here, because we're often told, of course, Americans will not work these jobs. Also relates to a recent story. I've covered this before, but I just find this to be so important. I love talking about this story, where after ICE raids struck a meatpacking plant in Omaha, Nebraska, and people said, oh, Americans won't work this job, right? Literally, the very next day, you had the job application center filled every single seat. You could not find a seat in the whole place. It was filled to the brim of Americans applying because they did indeed want to work here. And this is, again, why I will repeat here, these people, the so-called experts, the so-called economists who tell us that illegal immigration and mass migration as a whole is necessary for our economy and our economic growth and all that, and nobody else is going to work these jobs. No, it's just simply not true. They're just wrong. Keep that in your head. These people are just wrong. They don't know what they're talking about. And if they did, maybe Americans wouldn't be in such a populist mood, right? Maybe we would actually have felt the economic prosperity, supposedly, of the last 4 decades, but that is not the case. So with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. What do you think of Trump's recent economic progress? Do you see signs of optimism in the economy? Do you see signs of maybe not some optimism? Let me know. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.